Chapter 91 The Bombardment That Destroyed the Island. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I thought you would be late even with the speed of light. Major General Porcellino, Darren stretched out his hand tremblingly, trying to hold on to a gap in the rock wall to support his body but failed. Big drops of blood fell on the white snow, dotting the dazzling plum blossoms. He felt that his broken ribs and lungs were filled with the hot smell of blood. The large amount of blood loss made his brain go into chaos. Pain like a mountain roar and a tsunami surged from every muscle and bone in his body. Coming in waves, but the smile remained on his pale face and his tone was teasing. If you don't come back, I will have to file a complaint with the headquarters. Porcellino scratched his head pretending to be annoyed and raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. There's really no way around this. He turned his head and looked at Bundy Waldo, who had a gloomy expression in front of him, and smiled slowly. We meet again, Bundy Waldo. It seems that you have recovered well from your injuries. You are really in shape like a monster. Yellow-skinned brat, you're looking for death. Bundy Waldo's eyes suddenly burst out with fire, and his figure disappeared in a flash. In an instant, he appeared next to Porcellino. His fist wrapped in domineering force was like a mountain pressing down on him, and it was suppressed by the strong wind. Momo, 100 times speed. Kang. A golden lightsaber suddenly condensed and blocked Bundy Waldo's fist. The surging wind and waves generated by the collision continued to spread out, blowing the snow within 100 meters around like a tornado. A long string of sparks splashed out between the collision and friction between Tian Song-yun's sword and his fist, shaking off, illuminating Porcellino's face wearing sunglasses. It's really fast. Fart. Bundy Waldo gritted his teeth, and his figure flashed again on the right side of Porcellino. He lowered his waist with one foot on the ground, and hit Porcellino's head with a powerful whip leg. Porcellino raised his hand to block it, and a dull sound came out. The next second, his figure turned into a golden beam of light and shot toward the mountain in the distance. Boom! A huge explosion suddenly exploded in the mountain. The loud noise of the mountain wall collapse was deafening, and the rolling rocks mixed with snow rolled and poured down. The blow worked, and Bundy Waldo no longer hesitated, exuding a serious killing intent, and attacked Darren. Only by killing this Navy brat will the phone bug communication barrier disappear, and he will be able to contact the cruising pirate ship and escape. But the next moment, the speckled photons gathered behind him again. It really hurts, but have you ever been kicked at the speed of light? Dazzling golden light rose up from the back of Bundy Waldo's head, and a foot wearing a white leather shoe kicked through the air with a hot beam of light and hit the latter's head. Bundy Waldo looked at the naval captain so close to him, almost biting his teeth to pieces, and reluctantly used shaving to distance himself. The kick at the speed of light missed, and the golden beam penetrated the air, shot into the distance and disappeared into the jungle. After a brief silence, boom! Magnificent explosions and orange-red flames shot into the sky, and the fireball instantly engulfed large tracts of trees. Porcellino's figure came together again, his expression still filled with a teasing and funny smile, but Kaluan noticed that his right hand was trembling slightly. It can be seen that although Porcellino in this time period is powerful, he is far from reaching the bottomless level of combat power in the original plot. Even he didn't feel comfortable blocking Bundy Waldo's armed and domineering blow. Are you okay, Major General Porcellino? Darren said with a half-smile. Porcellino shrugged helplessly and pointed at Bundy Waldo, whose figure emerged 100 meters away. This guy is the world destroyer. The roar of artillery fire suddenly came from the coastline, and Bundy Waldo's face sank. In that direction, a large-scale naval warship was rushing into the harbor arrogantly. A large number of Navy elites with solemn expressions were jumping from the deck and rushing into the burning coastline, attacking those who were lucky enough to escape from the North Sea fleet. The pirates who survived the bombing launched a final siege. At the same time, a majestic figure also rose from the bow of the warship, with a wide cloak flying behind him, and it shot towards the location of the three of them at an alarming speed on Moon Steps. Admiral of the Navy headquarters, the highest combat power of the world government, Buddha's warring states. Period. Bundy Waldo's heart immediately sank to the bottom. The escape route was completely cut off. He was already injured, and with the old rival Sengoku and the yellow-skinned monkey, there was absolutely no chance of a comeback. "I'm sorry, Bundy Waldo, but you're under arrest." Porcelino shook the Tianconjian sword in his hand and said with a smile. "That's not necessarily the case." Bundy Waldo suddenly smiled ferociously, and there was unprecedented madness in his eyes. Porcelino was stunned. Warring States, who was rushing from afar, seemed to realize something, his pupils shrank, his face changed drastically and he roared. "Stop him quickly." Before he could finish his words, Bundy Waldo had already appeared at the edge of the jungle in the distance with his amazing speed. "Ha ha 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 ha. What's the use of having more people come?" In the sight of Sengoku's eyes splitting, Bundy Waldo raised the staggering cannon with both hands with a roar. The nearly 10-meter-long black barrel is like the slowly opening mouth of a war beast, emitting a strong smell of gunpowder smoke. "Let them all be destroyed by my power. I will destroy everything that hinders me. I am." Bundy Waldo suddenly raised his head, his eyes were blood red, and he laughed ferociously. "World Destroyer." As soon as the words fell, the terrifying, hot, and everything-devouring red light quickly brewed and condensed in the huge-caliber gun barrel. Seeing this scene, Sengu's scalp was numb, and he felt a biting chill coming from the soles of his feet, running up his spine and reaching his forehead. He had clearly observed Bundy Waldo's test cannon just now through the lookout glass. The astonishing destructive power, if coupled with the 100-fold increase of Momo fruit, it can definitely level the entire island in an instant. Momo 100 times. Bundy Waldo's pupils trembled and bloodshot eyes gushed out. In the corner of his eyes, he suddenly caught a glimpse of the bruised Navy kid suddenly sneered, and his fingers suddenly clenched into fists. Then, the barrel of the gun with an astonishing caliber suddenly twisted into a twist. No. Boom. The flames, which were thousands of meters high, turned into mushroom clouds that covered the sky and soared into the sky. Ask for everything, thank you. Chapter 92 Hailou Stone. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The world entered a brief period of death. The dazzling white light occupied everything in an instant, and then an overwhelming shock wave spread out in all directions from the center of the explosion. Countless trees were uprooted by this mighty impact. The huge fireball that covered the sky exuded astonishingly high temperatures, and formed a terrifying red flame tornado under the freezing temperature, covering the surroundings. All gravel, trees, snow, etc. were burned away. A full second later, a roar that almost shattered the eardrums came from the distance. All the navy on the coastline almost did not hesitate to find bunkers and fell to the ground. Their eyes looking at the huge fireball were filled with unprecedented fear, and their faces were pale. The North Sea fleet in the high altitude was shaken and bumped violently under the impact of air waves, and even the surface of the hull and deck were torn to the point of causing tiny cracks. Cake, Guillaume and others clung to the railings and other fixed objects with shock on their faces. Warring States crossed his arms to block the scorching gust of wind, his expression frozen in astonishment. He finally understood, why did that brat Darren dare to put this amazing cannon into the hands of Bundy Waldo? Rumble. At this moment, the entire island shook violently as if a magnitude 10 earthquake had occurred. Waves tens of meters high roar like dragons on the sea. "So, is this part of your plan?" Porcelino's tall figure stood in front of Darren, raising his hands parallel to the ground, assuming a defensive posture, and using his domineering display of weapons to help Darren resist the aftermath of the explosions that were constantly crushing him. Darren's blood-stained black hair was blown messily, and the blood at the corner of his mouth had dried. He licked his chapped lips and grinned. "He wants a heavy cannon, so I'll give him a heavy cannon." Darren paused as he spoke, and the smile on his lips became as cunning as a fox. "Of course, the gifts I gave him are not just these." "Oh." Porcelino was stunned, and then a strange smile appeared on his funny face. The wind annihilated and the flames disappeared. Rolling black smoke lingered in the sky, as if tearing away the falling snow. Everyone suppressed all the emotions about the aftermath of the disaster and looked towards the center of the explosion. The land of the desert island has completely changed, barren, blackened, mottled, and full of potholes. The earth burned with the embers of fire. All the snow, boulders, jungles and vegetation within a radius of 1,000 meters were destroyed by the big explosion and were completely burned to powder. At the center of the explosion, the exaggerated heavy cannon was emitting thick smoke. A huge hole was opened in the twisted barrel, and the molten metal turned into black and red molten iron and flowed to the ground. All the Navy took a breath and looked horrified, because they saw someone, Bundy Waldo. No, it was not so much a person as it was a bloody figure. Molten flesh dripped down like liquid, and blackened and rotten wounds covered almost every inch of his skin. The injuries on his neck and chest were the most horrific. Under the burned and ulcerated flesh, the lines of muscles were clearly visible. The exposed throat and trachea were squirming slightly under the white fascia. As for the chest cavity, no part of the skin on the chest was intact, and the surface flesh and blood was missing. The beating of the heart and lungs could be seen through the dense and clear gaps between the ribs. Such horrific and bloody scenes make people's scalp numb. Damn, damn. Bundy Waldo raised his head with difficulty, blood dripping from his body uncontrollably. His horned helmet had disappeared, revealing a bloody, skeleton-like face. With the eyelids missing, the eyeballs covered with mucous membrane seemed to protrude from the skull's eye sockets. The pair of exposed eyeballs turned around, and finally stared at Darren, with dense bloodshot eyes filling the air. "You have already planned all of this." Darren stood up from the rock wall tremblingly, panting and laughing. "That's right, but I didn't expect that you could survive such a big explosion." Bundy Waldo's eyes were split, and he gritted his teeth, revealing his bloody gums under his ulcerated cheeks. "Impossible. How could I fall into the hands of a brat like you from Beihai?" His eyes burst out with astonishing murderous intent, and he took a step forward. "Even if he is going to die, he will drag this brat on his back." Seeing his actions, Sengoku and Porcelino, who finally arrived, tensed up at the same time, but the next second, Bundy Waldo staggered 2 steps, knelt down on one knee with a plop, and spit out a mouthful of blood. "This, my body, how could?" he gasped frantically, covering his mouth with his rotten hand, blood seeping from between his fingers, his face full of disbelief. An unprecedented feeling of weakness gripped his body, making him weak and weak. Hailou stone. When? Bundy Waldo stared at the wounds on his thighs, abdomen, and arms. He could clearly see that the exposed flesh was actually embedded with black gravels. "It's a cannonball." Darren's breathing gradually became calmer. He raised his hand to wipe the blood on his face and said calmly, "I filled the shells of that giant cannon with a certain amount of sea tower stones. Originally I wanted to fill more, but after searching the entire North Sea, I only found this little." As soon as he said this, not only Bundy Waldo, but also warring states on the side suddenly turned their heads and stared at him in shock. Porcelino looked at Darren with a smile. "It's really insidious." To each other, Major General Porcelino. Warring states suddenly reacted and cursed angrily. "You brat, what are you thinking? What if this cannon hits my warship?" That was a super-large cannonball filled with sea-floor stone. If he was hit, even with his domineering defense, he would probably end up no better than Bundy Waldo. "Then I can only pray for you. After all, there are always mistakes in planning." Darren's overly calm tone made Zengua almost spit out a mouthful of blood. "This bastard, crazy brat. I believe Major General Porcelino will be happy to fill your vacancy as general." Darren added with a smile. Zengua's face darkened, Porcelino's smile froze. Darren smiled and shook his head, his eyes falling on Bundy Waldo again. "Then it's time to end. Bundy Waldo, do you have any last words?" Ask for everything and be grateful. Chapter 93. No need for last words. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Last words. Bundy Waldo panted slightly, murmured softly, and his eyes became dazed. He subconsciously turned his head and looked in a certain direction not far away. At that location, a pile of charred bones was piled there, and black smoke was rising. That was Binjak's body, facing a big explosion of the scale just now. He was weaker than an ordinary person and had no ability to resist at all. "Elder brother." He suddenly laughed. "Ha ha 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 ha." The curvature of the corners of his mouth gradually became crazy. and various complex emotions such as helplessness, unwillingness, despair, etc. gradually penetrated into the wild laughter. 2 lines of bloody tears seeped out from his skull-like eyeballs stained with flesh and blood. Tick-tock, tick-tock. He stretched out his bloody hands, pushed his body up with difficulty and trembling, and stood up from the charred and barren ground. He used all the remaining strength in his body, all his perseverance and his last will to command his body to stand up, and used his trembling legs to support himself upright. He glanced at the faces of Sengoku, Porcellino, and the many navy who kept coming with weapons, spitting out a mouthful of blood with a look of disdain, and finally his eyes fell on the navy captain. He smiled wildly. This will be his final victory, and he will never allow himself to show any cowardice before he dies. He used all his strength to breathe again. Do it, Darren Brath. My life is wonderful. Bundy Waldo raised his head defiantly, his voice deafening. Why do you need last words? Darren smiled. As you wish. As he spoke, he took out a coin and flicked it upward with his thumb. The silver coins kept flipping in mid-air, quickly reflecting faces one after another in the weak winter sunlight. Sengoku with a solemn expression, Porcellino with a teasing expression, a group of Marines who looked like they were facing a formidable enemy, Darren with bleeding from the corner of his mouth. Time seemed to slow down at this moment. In the cold wind of winter, petals of pure white snow fluttered down nimbly, and soon melted into the scorched earth. Bundy Waldo stared blankly at the flipping and falling coin, and the memory images hidden in the deepest part of his mind flashed across its smooth surface. When I was a child, I stood on the edge of a cliff and looked at the sea. The danger of encountering a storm when going to sea for the first time, the fear when encountering a fierce pirate for the first time to recruit a crew member, the first time to fight, the first time to kill someone. Bundy Waldo's violent eyes gradually softened. In the deepest part of his mind, a young and familiar voice slowly sounded. Look, Waldo, this sea connects all kinds of islands and countries we've never seen before. Don't you think it's great? Waldo, you must go to sea in the future. There must be adventures beyond your imagination waiting for you at the end of this boundless sea. You have to go far away on my behalf, see the world, and thrive. The young child looked at his brother who raised his hands high in front of him and looked confident, and a bright light gradually appeared on his face. Brother, I'm sorry, without you, even if I reach the end of the world and see so many scenery in this sea, what's the point? Bundy Waldo smiled, face up to the sun and snow, laugh. A blood flower exploded on his chest. The coin that had reached its lowest point suddenly shot out and penetrated directly into his heart. Bundy Waldo's eyes slowly closed and he fell heavily to the ground. Warring States watched this scene in silence, with a solemn expression. According to normal rules, when faced with a pirate like Bundy Waldo who possesses powerful devil fruit abilities, the Navy will capture him alive as much as possible and then send him to impel down for long-term detention, to ensure that this powerful devil fruit will not be reborn elsewhere on the sea and fall into the hands of an ambitious pirate. But he didn't stop Darren, because in the perception of the domineering power, Bundy Waldo's aura has become as weak as a floating thread. No one could survive such a serious injury. Fulfilling his wish and letting him die in Darren's hands was Sengoku's last show of respect for Bundy Waldo, his old rival for many years. The coin flew back to his hand deftly again. Darren turned to look at Warring States and smiled. The mission is accomplished, Warring States General. Warring States was startled, and immediately turned to his subordinates and issued an order. Start immediately, sink the last pirate ship of the Ward pirates, and wipe out the remnants of the Ward pirates. No need. Darren smiled weakly, took out a blood-stained phone bug from his arms, and dialed the signal. Base Commander Darren. Flying Squirrel's steady voice came from the phone bug. Has the target been locked? Yes. Then kill him immediately. No problem. The moment the words fell, as if he noticed something, Zengguo raised his head in astonishment. I saw one of the Navy warships slowly adjusting its direction in the North Sea Fleet suspended high in the sky. A black missile suddenly poked out of the side of the ship, then, boom. The tail of the black missile suddenly spurted out orange-red flames, peeling off the hull of the warship, dragging a long tail flame and shooting towards a certain direction in the distant sea. 2 seconds later, a dull explosion sounded distantly from the sea. and flickering firelight could be vaguely seen rising in the thick sea fog. Warring States stared at this scene with a stunned look on his face. That is, what the hell? Report to Commander Darren Base that the target has been sunk. The flying squirrel's voice came over the phone bug again. Well done. Darren smiled, hung up the phone and looked at Warring States. Report to the Warring States General, mission accomplished. In this operation against the Ward pirates, the North Sea Fleet sank a total of 5 enemy ships and killed more than 3,000 pirates. The captain of the Ward pirates, Bundy Waldo, and the deputy captain, Bin Jack, were executed on the spot. The North Sea Fleet's battle losses were 0. Warring States opened his mouth, but for a moment he didn't know what to say. Before Xinguo could answer, Darren's body suddenly shook, his eyes darkened, and he fell back to the ground. Colonel Darren. Hurry and save people. Where's the doctor? Get the ship's doctor over quickly. That the anxious voices of the surrounding navy continued to sound. It's over like this. Porcelino looked at the sleeping naval captain on the ground and said with a smile. Yeah, it's over like this. Warring States muttered to himself as if in a dream. So General Sengoku, it seems that this operation seems to be about the same with or without you. Porcelino said casually. When the Warring States period heard this, it was like being struck by lightning. Yes, apart from shouting stop him quickly, I basically did nothing. At least Porcelino, that unreliable bastard, arrived in time to save Darren's life and hang out with Bundy Waldo for a moment. Feelings, this time's crusade against the Ward pirates, really has nothing to do with me. Is it okay with or without me? Warring States came to this absurd conclusion in his heart and froze there in confusion, but the next second, when he met Porcelino's half-smiling gaze, Xinguo's old face immediately turned as red as pig liver. He said angrily and angrily. Damn! What's that look in your eyes? This is a raiding formation. Porcelino, you know what strategy is. If I hadn't had a sharp vision and overcame all the opposition to hand over the command to Colonel Darren, how could this operation have gone so smoothly? That after saying this, he turned around and walked toward the warship as if he was running away. The pace is fast. Porcelino looked at the back of Xinguo running away in panic, the corners of his mouth raised slightly. He retracted his gaze, looked at the naval captain who was being carried on the stretcher, and whispered. You always make hard things easy, don't you? Additional updates, please support me, thank you very much. Chapter 94 A Mere Fatal Injury. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Beihai Branch 321, Base Chief's Office. Warring States put his hands behind his back and stood in front of the huge floor-to-ceiling glass window, looking at the North Sea Fleet warships gradually returning to the distant military port, with a strange light shining in his deep eyes. North Sea Fleet, domination of the sky, strategic flying fleet, well-trained elite troops, small missiles, brand-new technological weapons. Words flashed rapidly in his mind, making him unable to help but think about it. Darren is very ambitious. Warring States narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself, tuck tuck tuck. There was a gentle knock on the door. Come in. Warring States responded, slowly withdrew his gaze, and his expression returned to normal again. He turned around and saw the flying squirrel pushing through the door. The flying squirrel was wearing a navy cap, with a resolute face, and raised his hand to salute. General of the Warring States period, are you looking for me? Warring States looked up and down at the deputy base commander of Branch 321 and deputy to Beihai Admiral Darren. He was very satisfied with the calm temperament of a soldier and said with a smile. My coming to Branch 321 should bring a lot of trouble to your work. Although Bundy Waldo is dead, the final work of defeating the Ward pirates still needs to be dealt with. Coupled with the need for supplies, Sengoku decided to stay briefly at Branch 321 for a few days before returning to the Navy's headquarters, Marineland. In this way, the base director's office was naturally commandeered by him. The flying squirrel shook his head and said. Don't worry, General Warring States. The North Sea Fleet has been greatly encouraged by your arrival. If it weren't for your plan, this operation to defeat the great pirate Bundy Waldo would never have been so successful. Warring States rolled his eyes angrily. Such flattery doesn't suit you. Don't follow Darren's example. The flying squirrel smiled awkwardly. It's really not his style to say such things. Speaking of that brat Darren, how are his injuries? Sengoku asked. The flying squirrel pondered for a moment and said solemnly. According to the diagnosis of the military doctor, Commander Darren suffered extremely serious injuries during this battle. More than 30 bones in his body were shattered to varying degrees, internal organs were bleeding, and the body was bleeding heavily. The situation is not optimistic. Warring States suddenly fell silent and sighed silently in his heart. Although that brat Darren has great ambitions, he quietly built such a powerful fleet without consulting his headquarters. With Warring States' vision and knowledge, he could immediately see that the 10 warships dispatched by the North Sea Fleet in the crusade against Bundy Waldo had all been modified. Moreover, the heavy weapons carried on the warships and the technological weapons used by the 321 branch navy are clearly from Germa 66, Germa 66. Warring States suddenly remembered another thing that happened not long ago. The North Sea Navy intervened to mediate the war between the Kingdom of Germa and the Kingdom of Yadis. Later, for some unknown reason, the North Sea Fleet and Germa 66 reached a friendly cooperation agreement, so, the collaboration between Darren and Vinsmoke Gage started at that time. Although I was somewhat dissatisfied with Darren's actions in my heart, looking back at the sacrifices Darren made to defeat Bundy Waldo this time, as well as the extremely tragic injuries, it was difficult for the Warring States period to pursue them. After all, that was Bundy Waldo, a big pirate who can threaten the Navy headquarters and the world government. I have never seen Colonel Darren suffer such serious injuries. The flying squirrel didn't notice the change in Sengua's micro-expression, and just continued to report the situation. According to the military doctors, if anyone else had suffered such a fatal injury, he would probably be unable to survive. Even if he could survive, he would definitely suffer a lot of sequelae and become a disabled person from then on. The more Jean Gua heard it, the more uncomfortable he felt, and a sense of shame arose in his heart. Darren almost lost his life in order to help him defeat Bundy Waldo, but deep in his heart just now, he actually had the idea of directly requisitioning the North Sea Fleet and its technological weapons and investing them in his headquarters. You deserve to die, Sengoku. Are you doing this worthy of Darren's efforts and sacrifices? According to the judgment of the military doctor, it will take at least 2 or 3 days for Colonel Darren to fully recover. The flying squirrel sighed sadly. Warring States shook his head with emotion. It's really not easy for Darren. Having him stay in Beihai all these years has compromised his talents. I will try my best to compensate him. Let him recover as soon as possible. After he fully recovers, that he suddenly seemed to realize something and stood there stunned. Wait. What did you say? He looked at the flying squirrel in front of him in confusion. That kid Darren will be able to fully recover in 2 or 3 days. The flying squirrel looked at the startled Warring States general and nodded with some confusion. Yes. The corners of Jean Gua's eyes twitched. Didn't you say that the military doctor said it was serious? At least 30 bones in the whole body were broken, internal organs were bleeding, and it was fatal? Yes. Didn't you say that if it were another person, he would have died a long time ago? Even if he survived, he would have a lot of sequelae and become a cripple from now on. Yes. Warring States gritted his teeth and said. Aren't you saying you've never seen Darren suffer such serious injuries? The flying squirrel said seriously. Yes. Warring States asked almost roaringly. Then why? The flying squirrel answered honestly. I have never seen Colonel Darren suffer such serious injuries. In the past, even if it was chopped by a sword, bombarded by artillery shells, burned by flames, or penetrated by bullets, it would basically scab over in less than half an hour. And this time, Base Chief Darren will have to stay in the hospital for 3 days. He said matter-of-factly. It's really serious. The serious expression on his face made Zengue extremely crazy. Warring States opened his mouth and faced the serious-looking flying squirrel. In the end, he couldn't say a word and could only cover his face in pain. Okay, I understand. You can go out first. I want to be quiet. Yes, Warring States General, if you have any orders, call me at any time. Flying Squirrel raised his hand to salute a standard military salute, turned and left the office. Etc. Warring States suddenly called him to stop. Where are Guillaume and Cake? Let them come over. The Flying Squirrel pondered for a moment and said. Reporting to the Warring States General, Major Guillaume and Major Cake are not in the branch. Where did those two guys go? Warring States asked in confusion. Major Giaggi took Major General Pagliusolino. Well, according to them, they went to sea to inspect the people's sentiments in the North Sea. The Flying Squirrel pursed his lips, the corner of Zengwa's mouth twitched. What about Guillaume? Major Guillaume went to capture them. Warring States period, ask for everything and be grateful. Chapter 95 An offer you can't refuse. You are listening at novelfull.audio. So Warring States period. How likely is it that you think this model of the North Sea Fleet can be applied to our headquarters? That in the base director's office, the deep and rich voice of Navy Marshal Cyborg Kong came from the military phone bug. Warring States frowned, thought for a few seconds, and then said after consideration. Reporting to Marshal Kong, it is difficult to say for the time being. As for the specific cost of the equipment and weapons of the North Sea Fleet, I need to wait until Darren wakes up before I can truly determine it. On the other side of Marine Fando, Cyborg Kong at the Navy Marshal's mansion crossed his arms and said in a deep voice. I have heard about Germa's high-tech weapons for a long time. With this powerful equipment, the Army's combat effectiveness can indeed achieve a significant leap in a short period of time. But during the Warring States period, you should know the strongest point of the North Sea Fleet. Not in the weapons. It's Darren. Warring States said slowly. That's right, the key to the Phaeton fleet lies in that boy Darren's devil fruit ability. Without him, the North Sea Fleet would be nothing more than a strong army, no matter how many high-tech weapons it was equipped with and the military quality of its personnel was strong. Cyborg Kong sighed. But with Darren's devil fruit ability, the strategic significance this fleet can exert. He paused, looked solemn, and said word by word. Immeasurable. Warring States nodded in agreement. The terror of a flying fleet can be seen from the Gai Shirji the Golden Lion, although the flying pirate group he leads is huge in number, far exceeding the average pirate ships. There are dozens of pirate ships under his command, but in fact, the strength of the Golden Lion's subordinates is not very strong. They lack the backbone combat power to support the situation, like the captains of the white-bearded Moby Dick squads, and they cannot be compared with Roger, who follows the elite route. But for the Navy headquarters, if we have to choose the most difficult pirate to deal with on this sea, that must be the Golden Lion Shirji. His extremely powerful combat power and his huge fleet, these are all secondary. The most feared thing is his ability to flutter fruits, lifting an entire pirate fleet into the sky, giving other forces incomparable mobility. They can easily attack targets and escape, making them almost impossible to guard against. And you have to understand that the Warring States period. As Darren becomes stronger and the further he develops his devil fruit, the more warships he can carry. With the talent he's shown, that's a given. Cyborg Kong lit a cigar, took a deep drag, and a smile gradually formed on the corner of his mouth. Perhaps in the not-too-distant future, the world's righteous force will have a flying general. Warring States was silent for a long time after hearing this. But Marshal Kong, regarding the control of the North Sea Fleet and Darren's tax collection in the North Sea, are our headquarters just turning a blind eye like this? After my observations over the past 2 days, the personality cult for Darren within the North Sea Fleet has reached its peak. Even to a certain extent, in the North Sea, the orders of me, the Admiral, are not as useful as the words of Darren, the colonel of our headquarters. The previous investigation results of Guillaume and Cake also came out. Darren relied on the taxes collected in the North Sea to equip his subordinates with top-notch weapons, equipped the most advanced warships, and even provided numbers that exceeded the standards of the headquarters. Double military pay and benefits. If we don't stop this situation, I'm afraid that over time, the Beihai Navy will completely break away from the control of the headquarters and become Darren's private army. Listening to Sengua's words, Cyborg Kong suddenly laughed. He said something seemingly nonsensical. Warring States period, it's time for you to grow up. Warring States was a little dissatisfied and said. Marshal Kong. Cyborg Kong chuckled. That brat Darren, I've read his profile. He's very smart, ambitious, capable, ruthless, and very good at winning people's hearts. Do you think that without his acquiescence, Guion and Cake, two young men who grew up in the headquarters, would be able to find out so much information? Warring States was stunned when he heard this. He seemed to understand something, and his eyes widened slightly. Marshal Kong, do you mean? Cyborg exhaled a dragon-like smoke from his empty mouth, looking at the Sea of Marinavando in the distance with his old eyes. The waves are turbulent, and the blue sea has no end and is tolerant. Darren could have continued to hide his North Sea fleet during this crusade against Bundy Waldo. The time and place of the transaction have been made clear. Although it is a bit risky, with your strength and the addition of Porcellino, it is not difficult to retain Bundy Waldo as long as he cuts off his escape route. Carden didn't do this. Gongu Kong's voice contained an intriguing meaning. He still sent the North Sea fleet. Warring States was shocked and murmured in disbelief. He is declaring force. Cyborg Kong nodded. Yes, he is asking our headquarters to make a choice. He has shown enough value, his combat power, his talent, his devil fruit potential, and the possibility of the Navy building a large flying fleet in the future. And what he wants is the North Sea. He wants absolute control and leadership of Beihai. He wants the headquarters to remain silent about all his actions in Beihai. He wants to be the one who speaks out. Cyborg Kong narrowed his eyes. King of North Sea. Do you think the headquarters will agree? At the same time, Branch 321, Military Hospital, in the quiet senior ward, the porch is filled with various bouquets and fruit baskets. The air was filled with the faint smell of blood and disinfectant. Flying Squirrel sat upright on the wooden stool beside the hospital bed and asked with a solemn expression. They would say yes. I took the initiative and exposed my abilities. It was an offer they couldn't refuse. Darren was leaning on the hospital bed, holding a lit cigar in his mouth. His narrowed black eyes looked toward the harbor through the glass window, and a confident smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Both of his hands were in plaster, and his naked upper body was covered with blood-stained bandages. His face looked a little pale due to the large amount of blood loss. Let's wait and see. I can't say these things in person, but Sengoku and Sora are very smart people. They will understand. The death of Bundy Waldo, the possibility of the flying fleet, and my future development, all of this is enough to give us a stable situation in the North Sea for at least 20 years. It won't be long before your letter of appointment comes down. Darren's eyes fell on the flying squirrel's calm and determined face, and he grinned. Congratulations in advance, the new Admiral of Beihai. Ask for everything and be grateful. Chapter 96 Mind and Courage. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This is absolutely impossible. Sengoku punched the desk angrily. Marshal Kong, the North Sea Navy is not the private property of Rogers Darren. Once this precedent is set, Marine Fando, as the naval headquarters, will lack the majesty to lead the world's righteous forces. On the other side of the phone, Cyborg Kong pinched his forehead with a headache. The Sengoku guy is very smart, but he often gets into trouble when it comes to power. In essence, he is a very traditional soldier who takes obeying orders as his bounden duty. Therefore, he will appear cautious on some sensitive issues. Not brave enough, Cyborg thought for a while. And asked. Warring States, do you think anyone other than Darren can achieve Darren's level? The Warring States period was speechless. Cyborg Kong smiled, with a hint of helplessness and bitterness in his smile. I wish there were more young people like Darren, but the answer is none. Even Sakaski and Porcellino, who you have high hopes for, and, well, that kid from the Garp family, can't do this. Warring States murmured in a low voice. I didn't expect anything from Porcellino. Cyborg Kong, he shook his head, took a deep drag on his cigar, and continued. Darren is a very good boy. He is so good that he even exceeded all of our expectations. Sengoku admitted reluctantly, his talent is indeed outstanding. No, not just talent. Gang Gukong said in a deep voice. I have already read the battle report you submitted on the campaign against Bundy Waldo. Not to mention the North Sea fleet that he built by himself, just from the deployment of troops, ambush routes, and tactical planning, the talents displayed by Darren are definitely the best in this sea. Use the North Sea fleet's firepower advantage to prioritize cutting off Bundy Waldo's retreat. Penetrate in advance and manipulate the arms of the transaction. Bundy Waldo's every move was clearly understood by him. I even think that the process of this action has been deduced countless times in that kid's mind. Our Navy is lucky to have young men with such outstanding military talents. If it were Sikorsky, Porcelino, and Dolag, the three brats, no, if it were you, would you be able to do it so easily? Sengoku. Warring States hesitated and was speechless. Porcelino, Sikorsky and Dorag, their talents and potential are indeed boundless. They are like bright new stars rising under the banner of justice, making everyone marvel and pay attention to them, but Darren's political skills, military talents, and strategic wisdom all reached a level beyond those of the three of them, without spending a single soldier. With a brutal attitude of 0 battle losses, the Ward pirates were wiped out. With this achievement alone, who can achieve it on this ocean? Bundy Waldo is an old rival. Sengoku, Garp, and Zifa have fought against him countless times in the past, but all failed in the end. It seems that Darren has surpassed the three of them to some extent. For a moment, Warring States felt that his face was burning. The most outrageous thing is that in this final crusade against Bundy Waldo, I really couldn't help at all. So, do you understand, Sengoku? Gangukong said meaningfully. Compared to a future naval admiral who can coexist with wisdom and strength, so what if just Beihai is given to him? And the most important thing is that no matter how bad Darren's reputation is, he still adheres to a bottom line in his heart. This can be seen from Beihai under his rule. The crime rate has dropped significantly, the living standards of civilians have improved, and the number of pirates has dropped sharply. Isn't this the justice we want to see? Warring States frowned and said, Commander Kukong, all this is for his personal power and ambition. It does not matter. Cyborg Kong interrupted Singua's words without politeness. Who doesn't have some ambition when living on this sea? We all know what that kid Darren wants. If he really grows up, he can one day lead our Navy to get rid of those bastards like Whitebeard, Golden Lion, and Roger. I am a naval marshal whose position allows him, so what if you come and sit down? His old eyes shone with wisdom. Warring States, I know you are worried about Beihai's problems. You are worried that under Darren's management, Beihai will become his personal power. I understand very well. But one thing you have to understand is that the courage of justice should never be limited to this. The Navy's capabilities are far greater than you imagine. Let me tell you another piece of news. Maybe it won't be long before I go to the Holy Land to serve. Sengoku's eyes widened. Marshal Kong, could it be? Well, that position is vacant. The previous commander-in-chief passed away due to illness. Cyborg Kong did not deny it, his tone was a bit understated. He leaned his broad back on the sofa, the rich smoke from his cigar lingering around his strong face, and said with seriousness. Warring States, I have high expectations for you. Among you, Zifa, and Garp, you are the only one who can take over my position. To hold a high position, you must have a broad mind and lofty courage. As long as Darren is still fighting pirates, as long as he is still executing the Navy's orders, as long as he is still wearing the cloak of justice, he will be a member of our Navy. What I mean, can you understand, that the Warring States period was a state of shock? Cyborg Kong's words were no less than a thunder on dry land, exploding heavily in his mind and causing huge waves. The phone bug communication was silent for a long time. I understand, Marshal Kong. After a long time, Warring States slowly raised his head and his tone returned to its previous calmness and calmness. Cyborg Kong laughed with satisfaction. So, what about the content of the news release? Have you thought about it? Warring States pondered for a moment and said solemnly. North Sea Admiral Darren, in the name of justice, successfully defeated the world destroyer Bundy Waldo. Ha 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 ha. Cyborg Kong's hearty laughter echoed through the Marshal's mansion in Marine Fando, the Navy headquarters. More updates, asking for everything, thank you. Chapter 97 Golden Age. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 321 Beihai Naval Branch, Military Hospital. The ashes of the cigar fell lightly to the ground. Darren exhaled a stream of smoke and winked at the nurse who was changing his needle water, causing the latter's ears to turn slightly red. How did the thing I asked you to do go? The flying squirrel glanced at the nurse, then said slowly after careful consideration. According to your arrangement, many fruits of various types were piled in the cabins of the fleet warships performing the mission, but no special changes were found. Darren frowned. Where is the target island? Has it been searched? The flying squirrel nodded cautiously. We have been searching all directions for the past 2 days and nothing has been found. The desert island has a cold zone climate. It is covered by wind and snow all year round. Only a very few cold-resistant plants can grow. It is completely unsuitable for human habitation. There are almost no fruit plants. Having said this, he paused, and when the shy young nurse walked out of the ward, he carefully lowered his voice and said. When General Sengoku's warship was supplying the 321st branch, I also boarded the ship to look for it, but I didn't find what you wanted. I have seen the logbook on the warship and the consumption record of supplies on their warship. 3 days before the mission was officially carried out, the fruit inventory on their warship was exhausted. Hearing the flying squirrel's words, Darren let out a breath of turbid air. After a moment of silence, he suddenly burst into laughter. Sure enough, it's not that easy. The flying squirrel muttered. Are you sure your idea is right? When a devil fruit user dies, the devil fruit will be reborn on the fruit closest to the user. This kind of thing is unheard of in this ocean. Darren shook his head. No, this is just my speculation, not certain. It's just a small experiment that allows you to prepare fruit in advance and conduct a large-scale search of the island during the cleanup after the war. Now it seems that this speculation is not valid. He naturally believed in the flying squirrel's ability to work. After working together for many years, Darren is very clear about his abilities and responsibilities. As long as it is his own order, no matter how ridiculous it sounds, he will execute it meticulously in the end. Since he said he couldn't find it, it means he couldn't find it. In this way, the inference that devil fruits will be reborn on nearby fruits after the death of the Esper has been overturned. This is understandable. As a time traveler, Darren is somewhat familiar with the plot of Pirates. Regarding the rebirth of devil fruit, it appeared 3 times in the original plot. The first time was when Whitebeard died in the battle on top. Blackbeard used some special method, probably the ability of the dark fruit to plunder his shock fruit. The second time was Fire Fist Ace. 2 years after the end of the Summit War, his burning fruit fell into the hands of Doflamingo, who put it in the fighting fish arena as bait. Also, in the plot of Punk Hassa Island, the killing weapon slime created by the evil scientist Caesar Brown used scientific means to make the poison gas eat the devil fruit and turn into the form of a salamander fruit. After the slime ate the candy and died, one of the apples in a basket not far away changed strangely and gradually turned into a devil fruit. It is this scene that makes many pirate fans think that this is the rebirth mechanism of devil fruit. Therefore, in this operation to defeat Bundy Waldo, Darren also had a try-attitude and asked the North Sea Fleet to bring a lot of fresh fruits. After all, Bundy Waldo's Momo fruit is indeed very powerful. Even if he can't use it himself, it is a good choice to give it to his subordinates to form his own core team. But now it seems that the rebirth mechanism of devil fruit may be more complicated than I imagined, but this is completely understandable. If the rebirth mechanism of devil fruit was really that simple, the world government and navy would have discovered it long ago. Apart from anything else, many of the criminals imprisoned in the city are devil fruit users. In Impelton's long history, there were definitely cases where prisoners died due to torture, disease, extreme evil, heat, cold, or even natural aging. according to Darren's understanding, transport ships specifically responsible for food supplies will come in and out of Propulsion City every once in a while to deliver food to the staff of Propulsion City, which naturally includes fruits. The geographical environment of Mtlnovel City is unique, surrounded by the sea and surrounded by windless sea areas. If a person with devil fruit abilities dies in Mtlnovel City, and there is a fruit in Mtlnovel City, then according to the rebirth mechanism of devil fruit, the devil fruits possessed by the dead prisoners with abilities will inevitably be reborn in Mtlnovel City, but over the years, countless prisoners have died in Mtlnovel City, but there has never been any news about the discovery of devil fruit in Mtlnovel City. So, the rebirth of devil fruit, maybe there is no pattern, is it absolutely random? Darren muttered. Do you need me to continue searching? Maybe the rebirth of the devil fruit will take more time to appear. Flying Squirrel asked. Well, we can leave some manpower to continue searching on the target island. Although the chance is slim, if possible, Darren will not miss the slightest chance. No problem. The Flying Squirrel nodded. By the way, there is one more thing. There is news from Marine Fando at our headquarters that the 3rd Officer Training Camp will officially start in 10 days. A glint flashed in Darren's eyes and he smiled. Is it finally starting? The Flying Squirrel pulled out a document from the folder behind him and handed it to Darren. This is the list of personnel for the 3rd Officer Training Camp. Darren took the file and opened it. The first line of the list is his name. Admiral of the North Sea, Commodore of the Naval Headquarters, Rogers Darren. Darren laughed. It seems that the award for the Hilda Saint incident has been approved by the headquarters. I have been promoted. The corner of Flying Squirrel's mouth twitched. Darren continued reading along the file. Lieutenant Colonel Kazan, born in the South China Sea. Navy Captain, Doberman, from the West Sea. Lieutenant Colonel of the Navy, Hua Xiaoshan, born in the South China Sea. Navy Lieutenant Colonel, Ghost Spider, born in the West Sea. He saw many familiar names. The Golden Generation, the stars are really shining brightly. Darren looked at the names on the famous list that would resound throughout the sea and write countless stories in the naval camp in the future, and the smile on his face was full of anticipation. The waves of the times are about to rise, and this is a mighty and star-studded era. The origins of some lieutenant generals and the time they joined the training camp are unknown, so there may be discrepancies, but they will not affect the plot. Ask for everything and be grateful. Chapter 98 The King of Beihai, End of Volume 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. With the disclosure of naval intelligence, the news that the legendary pirate and world destroyer Bundy Waldo was hunted down and killed by the Navy in the North Sea quickly spread throughout the country through news agencies large and small. As soon as the news came out, it was like a heavy bomb falling on the calm lake, causing huge waves. New World, a certain sea area, the sky is covered with white liquid like white clouds, and the blue sky and the deep sea are connected to each other. A huge pirate ship lay quietly on the sea, looking like a white whale from a distance. The skull and crossbones flag with the white scimitar beard flutters on the towering mast, level with the seagulls cutting across the sky. Dad! Something big happened. A boy with a golden pineapple head ran towards the bow of the ship with a shocked expression and a scream, holding a fresh newspaper high in his hand. A figure on the bow sat bored on the ground, holding a bottle of strong liquor in his hand, exuding a strong smell of alcohol. How many times have I told Marco, the first thing to do is calm down when something happens. The man stood up slowly. With this movement of his, the aura on his body was like a towering mountain rising from the ground, rising upwards as if there was no end. Under the giant whale-like pirate ship, the calm sea surface suddenly boiled, and circles of ripples and bubbles appeared like raindrops. I'm sorry, Dad. The young man named Marco immediately stopped the car, bent down and bowed, looking anxious. But you have to look at this. The man as tall as a giant slowly turned around. The sun shines down hard. The man was wearing a large captain's cloak, with a huge and exaggerated naginata standing at his side, and his long golden hair was dancing slightly in the sea breeze. The legendary pirate who roams the New World is considered a big enemy by the Navy. The world's strongest man, Whitebeard Edward Newgate. Whitebeard looked down at the young man in front of him, and a soft smile suddenly appeared in his domineering eyes. "Tell me, what happened?" The panting Marco took a deep breath, forced himself to calm down, and said loudly. "That guy Bundy Waldo, he was killed by the Navy." As soon as these words came out, the other crew members on the deck looked shocked, unconsciously stopped what they were doing, and gasped. Crash, the sound of rolling waves came. "Oh. That guy Waldo was actually killed by the Navy." A look of surprise flashed across Whitebeard's face. As a famous pirate in the sea, the Whitebeard pirates once fought against the Ward pirates led by Bundy Waldo, and they have some understanding of Bundy Waldo's strength. It was just a tentative battle. After all, the two sides didn't have much hatred, so there was no need to fight to the death. Moreover, both Whitebeard and Bundy Waldo were wary of the destructive power of the other's devil fruit. In order to avoid causing large-scale casualties to the crew, they only bombed each other from the air at the drop of a hat. To be precise, it was Whitebeard who shattered Bundy Waldo's 100x cannon with one punch. "Is it Sengoku or Garp who takes action?" Whitebeard asked in a low voice. "Neither." Marco shook his head. "It's a guy I've never heard of. He seems to be a colonel in the Navy stationed in the North Sea. His name is Rogers Darren." Whitebeard narrowed his eyes. He took the newspaper from Marco's hand and opened it. The headlines occupying a large space are clearly displayed on the front page. "King of the North Sea, Rogers Darren. Successfully defeated the legendary pirate, Bundy Waldo. The strongest admiral in the North Sea. Future admiral of the Navy. World destroyer Bundy Waldo died in a mere North Sea. Shocked. The Navy supernova who attacked Bundy Waldo turned out to be a scum with a bad record. Is this a distortion of human nature or a loss of morality?" The news report also included a photo, which showed Darren standing on countless pirate corpses during a military operation, with smoke rising behind him. "He seems to be an ambitious young man." Whitebeard stared at the unruly and evil-smiling black-haired Navy man in the photo, and suddenly burst into laughter. "Goo la la la. Kids, it seems you will have a good opponent in the future." The heroic laughter, like Hong Zhong Da Lu, shook the world. On the sea in the distance, huge waves rolled and there was no wind. Layers upon layers, like the roar of a dragon, the sea is shaking. At the same time, the great waterway, a certain sea area, tier. Thousands of pale thunder tore through the dark sky, and the roaring thunder reflected the torrential rain. The roaring storm stirred up turbulent waves, like the hand of an invisible giant, constantly throwing away a high-speed pirate ship. Captain Roger. Big event. In the heavy rain, a little devil with a red nose and a hood ran wildly on the deck. "Ha ha 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 ha. Bucky, don't slip." The black-haired man, who exuded an unruly and domineering attitude, stepped on the bow of the boat and laughed in the fierce storm. The crimson captain's coat fluttered in the strong wind, splashing large amounts of rain. "Joel D. Roger. Let me tell you. I found it first. Bucky." Another red-haired kid ran out of the cabin and hugged the red-nosed Bucky tightly. "Damn it. Shanks, who told you to run slow?" The two brats rolled and struggled on the deck, their immature faces gnashing their teeth and squeezing each other until they were twisted. Roger, who was sitting on the bow of the boat bathing in the violent storm, smiled and looked at the man wearing a shirt and rimless glasses not far away and said, "It's so full of energy. This is passion and youth. It reminds me of the time when we first went to sea." "Do you think so, Rayleigh?" When Rayleigh heard this, he rolled his eyes angrily, thinking that you were the only one with passion and youth back then. If this bastard hadn't been stalking him, I would have lived a retired life long ago. "Let's talk about it together, Bucky and Shanks." Riley waved his hand and said, "Yes. Mr. Riley." Shanks and Bucky glared at each other fiercely, then stood up straight and yelled out the latest news headlines. "King of the North Sea, Rogers Darren. Successfully defeated the legendary pirate, Bundy Waldo." Roger and Rayleigh were stunned at the same time when they heard this. King of the North Sea. This is a nickname I have never heard of before. Rayleigh took the wet newspaper and frowned as he looked at the words on it that were blurred by the rain, but Roger's eyes were filled with eagerness to try. This nickname sounds like he is a very capable guy. Hailou twitched the corner of his mouth and said helplessly. It seems like he's just a boy under 20 years old. Ha 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 ha. So what? Roger laughed disapprovingly, boom. A wave suddenly exploded on the side of the Oro Jackson, splashing a large area of salty water. It's a shelling. Captain Roger. Navy. Navy is catching up. Boom. 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 Black cannonballs tore through the rain curtain, drew parabolas from high in the sky, and continued to fall towards the pirate ship, Kang. The light of the sword is as brilliant as flowing water scattering flowers. Several artillery shells that fell from the sky were cut into two pieces by Hailou, and exploded in the sky above their heads, setting off thick smoke. The flickering firelight reflected Rayleigh's solemn expression. Roger. You can't run away. A powerful roar came from the sea far away from the stern of the ship. In the hazy sight, a naked upper body and muscular Navy man could be vaguely seen, standing on the bow of a dog-headed naval warship, constantly throwing cannonballs at them with his bare hands. Ah! Here we go again. Bucky held his head and screamed, with a look of horror on his face. Why does this bastard keep lingering? We are really going to die this time. Shut up. The red-haired man covered Bucky's mouth with his hand and said viciously, however, it could be seen from his pale face that he was also extremely uneasy inside. Ha 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 Garp, I'm not in the mood to play with you. Roger made a face at Garp from afar, smiling mischievously like a child. Hurry up and run away, that guy is the strongest Marine. Okay. The crew members cheered in unison. Under the control of the sailors, the Oro Jackson's sails were bulging, and its speed surged due to the storm. Damn! Garp gritted his teeth when he saw this, and the speed of throwing cannonballs in his hands became faster and faster. His hands almost turned into phantoms, and he roared in the air. Don't run away if you have the guts, Roger. Don't chase after you if you have the guts, Garp. Boom. Don't run. Then don't chase me. Similar things happen in every corner of the ocean. Looking at the headlines in the newspapers, some people sneered, some mocked, some were silent, some cheered, some were angry, some reacted indifferently, some were ready to take action. But one thing is certain. Today, the name King of the North Sea Rogers Darren has officially appeared on the stage of this sea. The first volume King of the North Sea ends with a bit of foreshadowing, but overall it's quite satisfactory. Well, best wishes, ask for everything and be grateful. Chapter 1 New Weapons. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 3 days later, Branch 321, Military Hospital, Advanced Ward. The blood-stained bandages were torn apart one by one, revealing fresh skin and flesh with a pinkish tint. The muscular and angular body was full of male hormones, making the young nurse's face turn red and her mouth dry. Master Darren, now let me help you remove the cast from your arm. The young nurse said softly. No need, I'll do it myself. Darren smiled, lowered his head, and punched hard with both fists. Snap! As the fists were clenched, the muscles of the arms contracted and bulged instantly, shattering the plaster covering the arms and turning it into powder. After moving his muscles and joints, Darren closed his eyes and enjoyed the care and cleaning of the nurse. Tuck tuck tuck. There was a gentle knock on the door, and then Sengoku's figure opened the door to the ward and walked in with a smile. Boy Darren, have you seen the report in the newspaper? You are really famous now. Darren gave a military salute and said with a smile. None of this would be possible without your cultivation and trust, General of the Warring States. Period. As he spoke, he motioned to the nurse to leave the ward first. Warring States laughed with satisfaction. The same words are flattering, but I don't know why they always sound so pleasant when said in the mouth of Darren. It seems that your boy is recovering well. He looked up and down at the naval colonel sitting on the hospital bed. No, it should be the Commodore, and said with a smile. It's not bad. I've been lying in bed for 3 days after all. Darren said. The corner of Zengua's eye twitched. He shook his head and continued. Have you received all the notifications from the headquarters? The entrance ceremony of the officer training camp is in 7 days. Darren nodded. That's fine. Warring States paused here, hesitating to speak. Darren smiled and said. Admiral Warring States wants to ask me about the North Sea Fleet, right? This kid is so smart, Warring States complained secretly in his heart, slowly became serious, and said in a deep voice. Well, it does happen. Boy Darren, with your vision and military talent, you should be very clear about the significance of the North Sea Fleet model to the Navy's strategic deployment. A naval fleet capable of flying into the air is enough to change the situation in this sea. Of course, you can rest assured that the forces in the 4 seas follow the principle of independent operation. The North Sea Fleet will still retain. The intention of the headquarters is to apply the model of the North Sea Fleet to the headquarters. Darren simply waved his hand and said righteously. There is no need to say anything, General of the Warring States period. As long as I can contribute to the just cause, I will definitely cooperate unconditionally. Regarding the assembly configuration of the North Sea Fleet and the transformation of warships, I will make a clear list and submit it to you for review. If the headquarters has any needs, I will try my best to provide it. It's just that, General of the Warring States period, I would like to remind you that the North Sea Fleet is in a special situation, and the price of weapons and equipment and warship modifications may be relatively high. The cost is not a problem. Warring States laughed arrogantly, very satisfied with Darren's statement, and looked at the latter with more and more admiration in his eyes. Look, this is the future star of the Navy, it's not like that bastard Porcelino, who doesn't see anyone all day long and has no positive attitude at all. Then let's stop talking here. Sengoku smiled and patted Darren on the shoulder. I admire you very much, Darren. After entering the training camp, you must perform well. He paused, as if remembering something, and lowered his voice. Well, when you graduate, you can become my adjutant. Today's weather seems to be very good, Warring States General. A slow voice sounded at the door of the ward. Xingua's face darkened. Darren looked weird. I saw this guy Porcelino standing at the door of the ward without knowing why, leaning against the door frame, with his hands in his pockets, looking at Sengoku with a half-smiling expression. The ward suddenly became very quiet. Xingua stood there stiffly, motionless, and Darren saw a few drops of cold sweat gradually forming on his forehead. Suddenly. Hey! It's me, I'm Sengoku. Warring States suddenly took out a military telephone bug from his arms and shouted at it anxiously. What? Such a big thing happened. Okay. I'll come back as soon as possible. As he spoke, he quickly walked out of the ward, his back a little flustered. Darren, Porcelino raised his finger and pointed at the Sengoku phone bug, and reminded with a smile. That. General of the Warring States period, it seems that the phone bug communication is not connected. Warring States paused, then his expression changed, and he mumbled to himself. Is the signal bad? He gritted his teeth hard. Damn it, it happens to be such a critical time. As he spoke, his pace quickened a little, and his figure quickly disappeared at the end of the corridor. Several black lines slowly appeared on Darren's forehead. Porcelino smiled and walked into the ward immediately. It seems to be recovering well. Good. Darren moved his somewhat stiff wrists and elbows. Porcelino glanced at him, a strange light shining under his toed sunglasses. I really didn't expect you to hide it so deeply. The North Sea Fleet greatly exceeded my expectations. Darren glanced at him and smiled. Major General Porcelino, just say what you want to say. Porcelino raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. I was discovered by you. Okay, I do have something to tell you. He spoke slowly, always feeling like he deserved a beating. The North Sea Fleet is indeed eye-catching, and flying in the air has great strategic significance, but haven't you noticed that even if it is equipped with the technological weapons of Germa 66, the North Sea Fleet's firepower configuration is still not enough? Darren narrowed his eyes, subconsciously sat up straight and raised his eyebrows. Major General Porcelino, what do you mean? Porcelino said with a smile. The Navy is about to form a special scientific force, which will be mainly used to integrate the research results of the genius scientist, Dr. Vegapunk, and apply them in actual combat to enhance the combat effectiveness of the Navy. Dr. Vegapunk, as a genius who is 500 years ahead of the world, has discovered some interesting patterns during the recent period, and based on this, he did some research and came up with a comparison interesting weapon. Darren suddenly became interested. You need to conduct field tests on this weapon to collect experimental data. Bingo. Porcelino's sunglasses reflected a faint light. He smiled half-heartedly and said. North Sea Fleet, are you interested? Darren asked, what's the weapon? Porcelino raised an index finger. This. On his index finger, a hot and destructive aura gradually rose, golden light gathers, the second volume sets sail and asks for everything. Chapter 2 Apology. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Did Vegapunk develop the experimental product of the laser cannon carried by the pacifists so quickly? Seeing the back of Porcelino walking out of the ward door with his head bent, Darren thought to himself, it seems that Vegapunk has unlocked the secret of the Devil Fruit's ability. This was an unexpected surprise. At this time, the Shichibukai system was far from being established, and the prototype pacifist tyrant Bartholomew Bear, who was equipped with a laser cannon, probably had not yet gone to sea. This also means that the pacifists who appeared in the Shampoo Islands incident in the original plot probably did not even have the most basic concepts. If a certain number of laser cannons can be mounted on the North Sea Fleet, rows of invincible fleets broke through the clouds and descended from the sky, using the most advanced laser cannons on the sea to wipe out all enemies within the target range. That picture makes Darren feel excited just thinking about it, the crushing of technology. If this plan can really succeed, Darren will let the so-called big pirates on this. See the power of technology, tuck tuck tuck. At this time, there was a gentle knock on the door. Come in. Darren responded. The door to the ward was gently pushed open, and a tall black-haired figure walked in heroically on high heels. What a rare visitor. Darren looked at the pleasing navy flower in front of him and couldn't help but make a joke. Guillaume glanced at Darren indifferently, put a bouquet of flowers on the table beside the bed, and said calmly. You're not dead yet. Villains can indeed live for a long time. Darren shrugged, a face swollen like a pig's head poked out from behind Guillaume, grinning and saying. Isn't this very energetic? Looking at Jiaji's bruised and swollen face, which looked increasingly scrawled, Darren suddenly became happy. Jiaji, what are you doing? Were you beaten while visiting a custom shop? Cake's face suddenly turned red. He glanced at Guillaume fearfully and hesitated. I guessed it right. The corners of Darren's eyes twitched, and a few black lines appeared on his forehead. He shook his head. What's the matter with you? Guillaume said slowly. The officer training camp is about to start. Major Jiaji and I are also members of this training camp. We will go to the headquarters with you for training. Darren nodded and said. Well, I know this. I've seen the list. With the strength and status of Guillaume and Cake, it is normal for them to get places in 2 officer training camps, although it is indeed too early for them. However, considering that their strength and experience have increased significantly during their time in Beihai, it is understandable that the Warring States General put them into the training camp in advance. Of course, this does not rule out that the old fox from the Warring States period wanted to continue being the nanny of these 2 guys. Congratulations. Guillaume nodded, turned around and was about to leave, but suddenly took back his step. She was silent for a moment. Colonel Darren, no, Brigadier Darren, I think I owe you an apology. Oh, Darren laughed with interest. Why? Guillaume whispered. I take back my previous evaluation of you. Although you smoke, drink, are greedy for money, lustful, like to kill people, and have a strong desire for power. She bit her lower lip with her teeth. But you are indeed a good Marine. Well, that's fair. Darren narrowed his eyes with laughter. It seems like you discovered something. Guillaume said nothing. On her way out to sea to catch Jiaji, she saw a pair of familiar figures. It was a small and cozy flower shop. The father and daughter in the flower shop changed their clothes, hairstyle and color, as if they were completely different people, but she still recognized the innocent little girl at a glance. Darren suddenly grinned. However, I still prefer your unruly look before. Guillaume's face darkened, and he quickly walked out of the ward on high heels, with the Commodore's cheerful laughter coming from behind. In the ward, Jiaji shook his head and looked at this scene, his face full of sadness. It's really yours. I've never seen Guillaume apologize to a person. Darren smiled. It has never happened, but that doesn't mean it never will happen. TCH. Jiaji snorted. You know how to be cool. He thought for a moment, then suddenly put an arm around Darren's shoulder and said dissatisfiedly. But you are so unkind. You accomplished such a great feat by killing Bundy Waldo, but you didn't take me with you. He waved his clenched fist, his eyes bursting with hot light. You know, I stood on the warship in the sky and watched you fighting on the island. The boiling fighting spirit in my heart made me tremble all over. Really? I heard from Flying Squirrel that you were so frightened that your face turned pale, and your hands were shaking so much that the railing was almost crushed by you. I'm afraid of heights. Jiaji's face turned red and he said. Do you understand that you are afraid of heights? If you let me go, I can fight side by side with you. Maybe Porcelino won't be needed. The two of us can join forces and kill Bundy Waldo directly. His tone was filled with resentment. What a perfect story that would be. A genius naval aggressor from our headquarters fights against the legendary big pirate. If this spreads out, how many ladies will I gain? Oh no, how much will I gain? Public support. I will be the new star of the Navy, the hope of justice. Darren glanced at him. But I heard that this is how you brag to others. Jiaji's tone was choked. I. His expression changed, and finally he sat down hard, picked up the fruit basket next to him, and started to eat it angrily. Darren laughed and shook his head. He stood up, put on his military uniform, and pulled off a brand new cloak of justice from the coat rack. I'm going out. Where are you going? Jiaji, who was holding a watermelon and munching it wildly, asked vaguely. Go to a custom shop. Hey, take me with you. Aren't you afraid of being beaten to death by Guillaume? Well, you know, I'm just testing you. A gentleman like me would never go to a place like that. Well, originally I was thinking that among the gifts others gave me, there were still a lot of membership cards that I couldn't use up. Commodore Darren. Please leave it to me to destroy such a thing that harms the ethos of the Navy. I promise to complete the mission. Ask for everything, thank you very much.